Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where you'll find information on what's going on the North Fork of Long Island. We'll be focusing on issues and opportunities going on in the community, as well as people and stories from the present and the past. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 54, our guest today is Louisa Hargrave, the pioneer of Long Island wine, and we explore Louisa's rich ancestry, her formative college years, and the inspiring journey that led her and her husband to transform the North Fork into a thriving wine region. We'll discuss the early challenges they faced, the evolution of the area, and Louisa's insights on the present and future of Long Island's wine industry. I hope you enjoy episode 54 with Louisa Hargrave. This episode was recorded May 14th, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you, Chris. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I'd like to just start off, if you could give us a little introduction where you were born and raised.
Yes, I grew up in Cold Spring Harbor. My dad fought in World War II, and after he was basically a New York family, after he came back from the war, he had to figure out what to do, and he got a job as a book editor working in New York City. And he and a bunch of his friends, that either from the war or from before the war, they decided, after they started having babies, my sister was born when they lived in the city, and I was born a year later, but they decided to move out to Cold Spring Harbor because it was a place where they had gone sailing there in the summertime. And so it was like a group of friends that all sort of bought property nearby. So we had a really close-knit community, which is not necessarily the standards, like 1950s suburban experience, which I think was kind of alienating in some ways. But for us, because there were so many, it was kind of all new and exciting, everybody having children, and we would have, like my parents would have parties with their friends, and everybody would get together, and you had to sing a song. People would put on little theatrical things, but it was really a great sense of community. And I haven't really given it a whole lot of thought in terms of, how I ended up on the North Fork farming, because I ended up going to, a boarding school, which was very, very academic, and I absolutely loved it. It was a great thing. And then I went to Smith College and Harvard University. So I was very academically oriented. But thinking back on it, that experience of being in a community where whole families really did a lot together, that was fun. And, like when my dad, he after many years, he quit his job because he felt like the publishing decisions were being too much driven by money and not enough by writing quality. And so one of his friends helped him get a new job. It was that, pretty in-depth people helping each other. And just by chance deciding to farm, which was kind of a crazy idea, never having farmed, but coming to the North Fork, to a community which was very, very different from what I had grown up in, accepting that everybody helped everybody. People really cared most about, being with friends and being with a community, and kind of, I think it was very welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And to go a little bit back from there in terms of your ancestry, how far back can you trace on your mother's or father's side?
I can trace 1,000,000 miles back, but I was thinking about this, a couple of particularly interesting forebears that had maybe influenced me without my even knowing about it, because I think some of this stuff is just, I don't know if you can call it genetic or what, but one is my mother's, my mother's grandfather was an engineer, and he worked with Thomas Edison, and he invented the rubber conveyor belt. So he worked in industrial mining with Edison, and Edison was trying to figure out how to get better coal out of the ground, and they worked together on trying to work on these big issues. And then when better coal or minerals were discovered out in the Midwest, Edison abandoned that project, and my grandfather had to go and do his conveyor business with other industries, but Edison helped him, and they marched in the big parade in Fifth Avenue, which was before World War I, to try to get America to go into that war and support the British. And then on the other side of my family, my father's side, I have kind of the opposite, where the missionaries are, because I think I ended up being a little bit of a missionary for wine and for farming, if you want to look at it that way. But my grandfather on my father's side, one of my grandfathers, his mother grew up in the court of the King of Siam, because her parents were Presbyterian missionaries. They went there in 1837. They were there for decades. I don't think they converted a single person, but they translated the Bible into Siamese.
Wow.
And they lived in the court of the king. And when they left, it was after the Civil War, because Congress had been supporting them there. And after the Civil War, there wasn't enough money, and they were recalled. It's kind of funny thinking of our Congress paying for Presbyterian missionaries, but it was really more like a State Department before there was a State Department. I mean, not having been there, I really can't say. But if people have heard of Anna and the King of Siam, she replaced them. She came after them. So if you see the movie and all the dancing and all that, who knows if they did any of that, but they did live there. And so they lived in a culture very different from ours, with people relating to each other in a very hierarchic way, whereas they were Presbyterians, which is very, very democratic. And then when they came back as a minister, and so at this point my great-grandmother was a teenager, they were assigned to run a school for freed slaves. So now they've gone from living in Siam to living in North Carolina, running a school for freed slaves as a training college.
Wow.
And this is where my great-grandmother grew up. So my grandfather, who was named Norman Thomas, he became a major political leader. He first started out as a minister also. But I think because of his mother's experience, where she preached, do unto others and that people are all equal, but not only did she preach it because it could have been elitist in a certain way, but having lived in these radically different places, I think she truly in her heart believed it. And my grandfather, he became a socialist candidate for president 5 times. He ran for president more than anyone has ever done. I knew him very, very well. He taught me to read. And I know the word socialist today is toxic, but he was strongly anti-communist from the beginning. And his belief was that people all deserve to be treated the same. And so Social Security, medical benefits, a lot of things that ended up happening through FDR were ideas that he promoted. So I think to come to the North Fork and be now, a college kid, because I was 24 when I came here, married, with this new radical project of farming a crop that nobody had farmed before, and being so welcomed by my farming neighbors, Mike Koloski and his wife Irene, Wes and Rose Simchick, John and Ann Wickham. Suddenly I found a community that was kind of similar to the one I had grown up in, even though, educationally and in other ways was different. But finding people who are welcoming, who are there to help, who didn't just kind of question us because we were different. Because, the North Fork, it's like, well, if you weren't born here, you're not a North Forker, and you never will be.
Yeah.
But I was pretty young. And I've had 2 kids, and they're both real North Forkers.
Yes. What initially really attracted you to the area? Because you had gone to college, and you didn't really have the winemaking in terms of that thought process earlier on. Even coming out of high school and in college, you weren't thinking of that at all.
Not at all. Not at all. But I think people need to go back and understand, because the idea is kind of losing its grip these days. But a liberal arts education, which is what I had, was an education for life. You go to college and you'd study. You'd have a major. My major was government, partly because of my grandfather. I felt it was something that I needed to understand. Never really quite got a grip on it, but, it took me a lived experience to understand power relationships.
Yeah.
Which is what it's all about. But nobody ever said to me, oh, go to college and find your career. I expected to be a teacher. But, I grew up in the 50s as a woman. I didn't even expect to be the driving force behind what I was going to do. I was going to get married and probably have a family and support my husband. And if I could teach, I would do that. But it wasn't really... I wanted to be a person who had curiosity, and also, this is what a liberal arts education was to me, to be able to use your curiosity and have the tools to learn what you need to learn. And that's exactly what happened for both. And my husband, he went to Princeton. He also, he majored in political science. He studied, his thesis was on the similarity between the concept of Thomas Jefferson and Mao Zedong regarding property, because they both felt that property should only belong to people who were living. If you know that about Thomas Jefferson, I'd be surprised.
No.
But that's true. Thomas Jefferson, the earth belongs in usufruct to the living. It only belongs to those who are actually using it. So, he liked poetry, and then he went on to Harvard, and he got a master's in Asian studies, and I was a year after him, so I finished my college undergraduate degree. And honestly, we didn't really know what we were going to do. His father was an attorney. I think his family thought he would be an attorney, but he took a pre-law course and he hated it. So, yeah, we were searching. I've heard other people talk about, me and my husband and how we started this, just in terms of, well, we were privileged people who just kind of bought our way into it. I mean, certainly we were educated well, and we were sort of debt-free when we were done with college, which was a great benefit. We didn't know what we were going to do, but I think neither did the Vietnam War was going on. My husband was 4F because he had a spinal curvature. But our friends didn't know what they were going to do necessarily either. I mean, maybe they were going to go to law school, or, we didn't really know. And it wasn't the kind of a thing where you have to know that you're going to maybe follow in the family business, whatever it was going to be. So we expected to be exploring a little bit. I mean, definitely I was preparing to be a teacher. I got my master's in teaching. I taught nursery school, but my husband, a year after we were married, he had 13 vertebrae fused. He had to have his spine straightened out. He was in a full body cast for a year. And that, we did fully plan to finish college and go be employed. But because that happened, that set us off. And at the same time we got into food and wine just tangentially the way one does. And we were married in 1968. So mastering the art of French cooking, Craig Claiborne. It was a massive revolution in food where, my mother her thing was the I Hate to Cook book. She was a very good cook, but it was minimal because she didn't want to be the housewife. She was a housewife. She wanted to do other things, and she started the Multiple Sclerosis Society because my father had multiple sclerosis. So, but still she was categorized as a housewife. So she didn't want to be the one baking cookies every day. And, she kind of rejected that. Me, I wanted to learn to sew. I loved to cook. And we got into the wine scene when we were living in Cambridge, where you could buy like a Chateau Bechevel for $2.99 a bottle. If you wanted the best wine in the world, a Chateau Latour, you might spend $5. To put it into context, my food budget for the week was $18 or $19. So that's a lot of money to spend on a bottle of wine, but it's not like today. If you want one of those wines, you're going to spend, $1,000 or more, or you can't get it. Yes. So we got involved in French wine and then some American wines, which were pretty marginal at the time.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was interesting with Norman Thomas, because he was the second person to run as a socialist after Eugene Debs with the presidential elections. And I actually have one of his books that is signed by him, actually. So it's really interesting that you brought that up.
Oh, well, that warms my heart. I loved him. We called him Big Dad. He was very tall and very imposing, and he had a massive voice, which I learned. So he was born in 1884. And I love it that somebody I knew so well was born in 1884, because when I read history and I read about things that happened then, and picture people wearing these starched clothes and whalebone corsets, and I think, yeah, but Big Dad was born in 1884, and he was class of '03 at Princeton, and he went around the world right after that, and this was the world that he lived in, and I knew him, and he wasn't an old fuddy-duddy, far from it. He was so dynamic, and so he lived, actually, his wife, my grandmother, Frances Violet, she died a month before I was born. And so he had lived just down the road from my parents, beside having a place in the city where he was if he was campaigning. But he had a house in Cold Spring Harbor that he had had for many, many years, because my grandmother had a kennel there. She raised Cocker Spaniels. Lord knows why. The stories go on. He had a cow. Well, he grew up in Marion, Ohio, and he loved his farm, and he had apples, and he loved making applesauce and eating. I know my mother used to go on about how he loves rhubarb, and I hate rhubarb. She hated rhubarb, and she thought it was so old-fashioned. She couldn't understand anybody liking rhubarb. But he was like as much as he was a dynamic, labor leader. He was a labor leader. But he was a farm boy, too. I think we always try to categorize people as being one thing or another, but that wasn't it for him. He loved his farm. So anyway, my parents, and this place where I lived in Cold Spring Harbor, they just built a little house for him where he could be when he wasn't campaigning. So he would be there a lot. And somebody gave him a very early TV. So when I was really little, we didn't have a television. I remember watching the coronation of Queen Elizabeth on this TV, which was mostly snow. I mean, there was no picture. It was just like, we knew there was something happening. But I was like five or 6 years old, but I remember it clearly. And we would watch Kukla, Fran, and Ollie on that little TV. So he would be there sometimes. He liked to listen to bird songs. So you'd walk in when he was home, and you'd hear the disc going round and round, tweet, 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 the robin, the cardinal. It was just, I think, so, yeah. Again, labor leader, I've seen pictures of him being pelted by rotten tomatoes. I know that he campaigned down in the South to organize sharecroppers. He was one of the organizers of the March on Washington. He was a friend of Martin Luther King. He was so fervently devoted to the idea that people are created equal. And he wanted people to be treated equally. And he would put his life on the line for that. And he did. He did. So he was around all the time, but he was very funny. And he would tell stories about people he met, and he remembered everybody. He had met my husband's grandfather, who ran Eastman Kodak, but who was also had grown up in Wymore, Nebraska. I think his family had owned a shoe store, but whatever. Nebraska in the 1800s. That was early on. The two of them, so my grandfather went up to Canandaigua, New York, where Alec's grandfather lived, and they had a campaign. He was there making a speech, and Alec's grandfather, as the story tells it, went up to him and said, "Mr. Thomas, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I really like you and your style. Will you come have lunch with us?" So, I mean, how cool is that? Like, my future husband, his grandfather had lunch with my grandfather. Already. They were on polar opposites politically. This wouldn't happen today. I wish it would.
Yeah.
But he was just such an open person. And I remember when the Vietnam War started, and Big Dad would come have, it was usually Sunday lunch, he would come have with us. And, back then you'd wear a coat. And he didn't go to church anymore because he gave up his religion when he became involved in politics. He said, and in World War I, he said he couldn't believe there was the God of war and the God of love could be the same God. He just didn't get it. So he spent a lot of time campaigning. And, if you campaign all over the country, you're likely to go to meetings in every kind of religious group, which is fine with him.
Yes.
But I don't think that he was religious as such. But anyway, Sunday lunch, you wear a tie. And my mother would joke that he always had gravy on his tie because he didn't care how he looked. He cared about his ideas. He had this big head and, big laugh and big booming voice. But then the Vietnam War started, and my father, was a book editor in the city, and he published John Kennedy, published Robert Kennedy, Maxwell Taylor, but, he read the New York Times, and he kind of went along with this domino theory of war. My grandfather, who's, as I said, his mother grew up in the court of the King of Siam. He visited China when he was, 20-something years old. He had seen that part of the world in a way that my parents hadn't, most people hadn't. He didn't, and he understood the communists because he'd been so opposed to them forever. And he didn't think that the Vietnamese communists would be controlled by the Russian communists. He didn't believe in the domino theory, and he understood it better than most people who just liked that facile idea of the dominoes, which was really an excuse for us to go meddling in something that was none of our business. So he was adamantly opposed to the war from the very beginning and very outspoken about it. And I remember sitting at, Sunday before, and I'm a kid, right? So what do I know? But just hearing the different levels of tension between my father, who's trying to argue one way, and my grandfather's trying. And of course, it's a father and a son to have a perfectly amicable conversation. But, this is America. I mean, it goes on like this.
Yes.
And I remember when I was at Smith College, I had met my husband-to-be, who was at Princeton, and my grandfather, Norman Thomas, was invited to speak about the war at Princeton University on a panel. People for it, people against it. There's like 5 people on a panel. And he's 80-something years old. He's quite deaf. He's almost entirely blind. He's all bent over. You cannot believe this relic of a man is going to have anything to say. And I'm in the audience, and I'm seeing him, he's up on this, big table, and he's completely slumped over. And I'm like, oh, this is so embarrassing. I just don't know, why he's here. And somebody says something he doesn't agree with. And he rises up, like rising from the dead. And he slays this guy with the best argument you've ever heard. I'm like, yay, go Big Dad. It was so wonderful. So wonderful. So, I mean, for me to reference them, and I am not anything like on a par with him, but in terms of my family history, to have an idea, articulate your idea, have the courage of your convictions, go ahead and do it. okay, it's growing grapes and making wine. I mean, it sounds for me on my part, yeah, I mean, it was an idea of how to have a life. But now I feel, being older and sort of thinking about like what might have been family influences. Yeah, my grandparents stepping out. Even my grandfather Robbins, who invented the conveyor belt, you know, he's sitting there thinking, well, this is America. We want to produce, you know, it's time to make progress. And what can I do as an engineer to, you know, make that happen? Well, he's going to make rubber. He invented the rubber conveyor belt. Before that, they were wooden or canvas, and you put iron ore, gold ore, any kind of heavy ore on it, and they're torn to pieces immediately. And he designed ways for them to turn corners. So,
and that changed a lot of,
yeah.
a lot of
I mean,
things
he
for
doesn't
America.
get credit for it. He wasn't the only one, you know, working on it, but
Yeah.
I think to be, and yes, I mean, you could say, I was laughing. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're literally at the end of their lives because they're in hospice care, but we were talking about their life experiences, and they were like, you know, I've been so lucky and so happy in my life, and I know that the things he's done because of his own genius. But what he said was, well, you know, heterosexual white male growing up in the 50s, I had that advantage. And I laughed, and I'm like, yeah, I had that same advantage too, except I was a girl. So, but yes, I mean, there were advantages to the way I grew up, and the idea that coming out of college and then being married, my husband and I could have the great privilege of deciding what to do. It's true, we had some money, but it was very limited. And we never had the idea that we were just going to go get somebody else to do it. It was our idea, you know, to do something, and we didn't care if somebody hadn't done it before. Mm-hmm. We didn't care if we would be the ones taking all the risk. So yes, we had the advantage of some money that my husband got in a trust from his grandfather. But also that was something where, I mean, it was stock in Xerox and Kodak. And he sold it at an all-time high, and his family were like, why in the world would you do that? These are the best stocks in the world. These are wonderful stocks. They're only going to continue to grow, and you're, you know, upsetting your family heritage. And he's like, no, I'm starting my life. I have an idea with my wife. We know what we want to do, and we're going to liquidate this money. If you want to give us more, that's fine. They never did. Mm-hmm. But we're going to take what we're given, our education, our curiosity, and this amount of money, and we're going to leverage it. But we did the thinking and the work ourselves. So I think that's similar to my legacy from my family that I gained seeing people who would go forward despite however other people wanted to disparage them or argue with them or tell them whatever they're doing is ridiculous or dangerous or whatever.
Well, yeah, like you said, it's not, people can say that about the privilege thing, and mm-hmm. I think in some ways it's, you still had to come up with the ideas and still mm-hmm. think creatively on how you would do this in a new area and region, and it wasn't like things were just handed, like, okay, here, now you do this and that and it'll be fine. It's like there was a lot more things that you had to go through to make sure this was going to work long term. Yeah.
Including people who wanted to give us advice and tell us what to do. You've read my book, so you've seen like the big plot there is the mm-hmm. Cornell guy who really wanted us to fail because we were threatening what he'd been doing in upstate New York and saying that you couldn't grow Vitis vinifera in the state of New York. And I mean, this sounds like a small petty thing if you're listening to this, but it was a big thing if you want to grow grapes and make wine because our idea was completely opposite to his accepted belief. And then we showed that we could do it. He came down in the guise of helping us. But we learned from this other professor, John Tompkins, that came along that he desperately did not want us to succeed. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, we learned that only much, much later, but somebody comes saying they're going to help you, and they're really trying to trip you up, it's not very nice.
And you also had people that were here that also didn't think you would succeed in terms of the switch over from potato farms. And did you also have even wine enthusiasts at the same time, maybe that were more in New York City, that were saying, what are you doing with this out here? And
we didn't listen to any of those people. We didn't care. We knew that we knew more than they did. No, but the irony of it is, like all those people, there's always naysayers. But the wonderful, wonderful thing is that our neighbors, you know, the Mike Kolaski, John Wickham, the Simchicks, they would do anything for us. They weren't privileged, affluent. Well, maybe John Wickham was on the other, you know, I mean, he'd been, you know, going to Cornell, and he was maybe more similar to us in that way. But again, it was his contribution was on a human level, where he literally got on his tractor in the middle of a blizzard to come across the several farm fields for miles to see if we needed anything for our infant daughter. You know, did we need milk, diapers, and, you know, how could he help? And Mike Kolaski, just for years, he taught us how to farm. He really taught us how to farm, and he and Irene, we could go over there anytime and join in the family meal, but also just sit and hang out. Mm-hmm. And when we had a crisis, a machine break, we didn't even know how to hitch a cultivator onto the tractor. He literally, did he have time to spare? You know, he's farming a large, large farm. We didn't even think about that. He just came over and with his generosity, and I think we accepted it. You know, we could have been like, you know, who is this nosy neighbor?
Yeah.
But he was so wonderful. I remember one time, there was a time in the summer when everything ripens. Mm-hmm. And he grew potatoes and cauliflower, and all those were his main crops. But of course, he also had his side crops, his beans. He had some raspberries. He had these specialty Italian beans that he said he grew for a very specific market. But he also loved experimenting with things, and he was the first person to grow shallots here. He said he could not get anyone to sell him seeds for shallots because it was a protected industry. Think about that. Mm. But so one day, you know, there was so much going on, and he said, we're trying to pick all these raspberries, and we're just making raspberry juice and raspberry this. If you need any raspberries, just come get some raspberries. And I'm thinking, you know, this is the true farm life where you have way too much of one crop. You wish you had raspberries all year long. You're going to make jams and jellies and this and that. That's the old way. But to have just this abundance of raspberries that you don't even know what to do with them. And then similarly, he had so many beans. They were all ripe at once. He plowed them under because he couldn't pick them and get them to market. Wow. And be paid for the effort of picking. Even though it was his sister Cookie who came out of Queens with her kids to help with the bean picking. You know, they have, like, I don't know, a family of 6 or 7 kids, and they had all dispersed, but they would come out and help with the farming. This is what I wanted, you know, when I thought about, I mean, I have to admit, you know, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House in the Big Woods, Little House in the Prairie, probably influenced me more than anything, this idea of being this tough little girl, not as pretty as her older sister, you know, getting into trouble, but trying so hard and being in the wilderness and just making things happen. That's, I think, how I saw myself. Mm-hmm. But you don't succeed without help, and you have to accept it. And that's what we found in this North Fork community. Mm.
And in terms of I was curious about when you did kind of initially come out, what you thought of the other areas around the North Fork in terms of even if you would come through Greenport or Southold at that time, just what you thought of the village or the town?
It's kind of a good question. I mean, so I've spent some time in Champagne, in the Champagne region of France. Mm-hmm. And when I was over there, somebody made a comment that just kind of blew me apart, because they explained that the little villages in Champagne, they're all about 2 miles apart, because that's how far you could go from your house in the middle of the village out to the field and come back for lunch. You mm-hmm. look at the North Fork, and all the little villages, they're about 2 miles apart. You know, they're all from, 1600s, 1700s. It's where, and everybody's farming, and it's how you can get back home for lunch from the field. Mm-hmm. Still defined that way. And yet, Mattituck, Cutchogue, Southold, Greenport, every village, even when we first came here, had its own character. I will say it probably took me a year to even get to New Suffolk, because I arrived on this farm that we bought. Bam! I'm working. I didn't explore. Maybe in the middle of winter, I finally made it to Greenport.
You were set on getting.
We had to start our farm. We had to work on our farm, and we had an old farmhouse that.
It was an old potato. Well, it was from the 1680s.
Well, because of the cellar and the red stone. We had red stone in this little tiny cellar that had come over from New Haven Colony. Because if you think about it, there's no stone here. You want to build a cellar or a well. Where are you going to get the stone? And we were part of New Haven Colony. So they would send us rocks, and we would send them food, flax. They couldn't grow stuff like we could.
Yeah.
So we had this, just happened, the farm we bought, and it was a great thing, but it had a little house, but it was, it had holes busted in the walls. It had a mouse in the stove. It needed some fixing up, but it wasn't like, I like to watch House Hunters now, and people come to these houses and like, oh, I couldn't possibly buy this house. This bathroom, it has pink tile. I could never live here. I'm like, buy the house, use the bathroom, change it when you can. I mean, come on. Yeah. It's, really? Mm-hmm. So we just, made the most of it. In fact, the first summer, it was so hot because the house had little rooms all divided up, all like 5 rooms. But, starting with a 2-room house built in 1680 or something, mm-hmm. and they had added on a little extra space somewhere along the way. But that first summer, we slept outdoors every single night. We dragged a mattress out and slept outdoors because it was so hot. And then in the wintertime, we took the ceiling out in the kitchen and the adjacent room, and took the ceiling out upstairs and took a wall out, and we just took it down to about 4 rooms. And we lived like that, with our little kids and everything. But little kids love a close space. They love a small space. It was fine. But in terms of the different villages, I remember going Christmas shopping in Greenport. Now, Greenport was kind of almost an abandoned little village, but it was so similar to Cold Spring Harbor, where I grew up, because they had both been whaling villages and had magnificent houses that had seen better days. Everything was pretty run down. But we did make friends in Greenport with the Gustafsons, and, who bought, and not when we were first there, but after a few years, they bought the Suffolk Times, and they were basically our age, and and they gave great parties, and they introduced us to a lot of people there. And again, we saw another side of the North Fork, creative people, just so many interesting people here. And then, of course, the summer population, we didn't really pay too much attention to that unless they wanted to come and buy some wine.
Yeah. Yes.
I remember thinking, Nassau Point, kind of fuddy-duddy, like Southold was like all these kind of fuddy-duddy retired people, and the main street in Southold in the 70s, it was pretty run down. You had like a little children's, I don't even know why there was a children's clothing store, because there weren't any children around. It was so like a retiree place that had obviously been a much more vibrant village, but it just wasn't. And now it's very funny because Southold is just like the spot. Yeah. It's happening.
Yeah.
Greenport, happening. Cutchogue still has my heart, I will say.
I mean, with Cutchogue, I don't see Cutchogue as, well, I guess I can't say because I wasn't there in the 70s, but I guess Greenport and Southold seem like a lot of things were renovated and changed more so than in Cutchogue.
Well, Cutchogue, you had a kind of a grocery store that if you walked in, you would probably see a rat or certainly a cockroach. So it was just very, very limited little spot. We did not shop there. Then there was Helen Mazellan's store. That's where if you were a farmer, you could go and you could get a raincoat, boots, but it was very Polish. You could get the babushka. They had these really beautiful handkerchiefs babushkas.
Yes.
And then there was Ambrose Terp's variety store where you could buy, it was like Woolworths. You could get anything there. Sewing notions. It was very funny, like, because you're in a farming community and if you're working and you're living on a farm, you don't really have time to go very far or explore. But, like when I had kids, wanted to buy shoes, there were 2 shoe stores in Riverhead. There's Sweezy's department store. I was talking to my daughter about this recently. You could get whatever you wanted around here. Greenport had a shoe store. They had the arcade, similar to Terp's. It was so community by community where you could kind of go and get what you wanted.
Yes.
But it wasn't fancy.
No. Well, it's obviously changed in that respect.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask about just some of the initial, when you first started, when you established the vineyards on your farm, what were some of the early challenges that you had to overcome? Because I know there was some with the crops in terms of even birds or...
Oh, yeah.
And then was there like a hurricane?
Well, yeah, I mean, so there were challenges that we anticipated having, never having farmed before. Like we knew that there could be hurricanes. I grew up on Long Island in the 50s. We had hurricanes. I knew what that was like.
Yes.
But the worst challenges are always the ones that you don't expect. But also, yes, certainly fighting off the birds. I think we knew we were on the Atlantic Flyway, but I don't think we knew quite what that meant. And trying to keep the starlings out of the vineyard. And then early on, we bought bird netting, which nobody ever really seen out here. And you try to figure out how to get bird netting over very tall rows of vines. We had to invent a rig, go back to my great-grandfather, and figure out how to put the nets on. And then it turned out the birds could get under the nets very easily, so we had to literally staple them get wire, cut the wire, bend the wire, stick it in the ground. I mean, the amount of labor was insane. And we were always trying to come up with different ways to chase the birds. Never with full success, but we still ended up with crops somehow. And then first year we planted 17 acres with the plant material we could get. We ended up owning 84 acres, but we didn't have it all planted. Because with wine grapes, they are supposed to be grafted. So you have to get the graft material together and root that for a year. And then you transplant those plants where you want them. So it takes a couple of years to get plant material. But then after our first year of planting, we were told that there was a virus and we had to have virus-free stock and we had to buy it from California. And it wasn't going to be grafted, but this is what we had to have. And I don't even know why we listened to that dictum, but we were told we'd never be able to propagate our vines in the state of New York if we didn't do this. So we bought these vines out of California, and they were little potted growing plants. And, we got them here, brought them here deliberately after what was supposed to be the last frost, which was May 7th. Or I don't know what it was, something like that. And the next night we had a full moon and we had a frost. So we didn't lose very many of them, but it was harrowing. And then we planted them out, and then like 4 years later, this guy from California, John Casamatis, who was the chief grape growing guy in California, he comes out and he looks at this block of Merlot. We had the first Merlot east of the Rockies too. Like, how about that? At that time, there were only 500 acres of Merlot in all the United States.
Wow, that's amazing.
So anyway, we got this plant material from California. We planted it out. It was heat-treated, virus-free. And this guy, Casamatis, he comes out and he looks at these plants and they've got red leaves. And he's like, oh, well, those plants clearly have virus. I thought you bought virus-free plant material. And we're like, yeah, we did. Here's our certification. But then it turns out the University of California, Davis, that sold the clonal material, they sold clonal material to the nursery that we bought it from, knowing it had a virus, certifying it virus-free. That's just wrong. So we ended up with a lawsuit. By the time we won the lawsuit, the nursery was out of business. So that's something that, you can listen to this, it's old history, and think, well, it didn't matter, you still got along okay. But those were many acres of vines that we purchased, tended, planted, even got some crop fund from, but they weren't what we thought we were getting, and we had to tear them out. And then you have to start again.
Yeah.
And that's what it is to be, a so-called pioneer.
When you're starting like that, you have to go through all these different trials and error.
Yeah.
And then there were even regulatory hurdles.
They were the worst problems. The worst problems that had to do with, the biggest one was with the DEC. The DEC was, I'm in favor of environmental conservation and I'm in favor of regulation, but the problem is this was an agency created and funded by the fines that they could collect. So they're out looking for ways to get fines. And we bought fungicides that everybody used. They were not, toxic, except to funguses. It's not like it was something dangerous, but every pesticide or spray that you use, even if it's organic, it has to be certified to be used. And that certification requires a fee by the company that makes it. They have to file it every year. So the DEC goes and looks in the file of this company that sold us this spray, and they find out that the secretary hadn't sent in the $50 to certify it. So they came looking for everybody who had bought that specific product. We had bought it. We called Bill Terry, who worked for the Cauliflower Association. He sold us our fertilizers and all that stuff. He was a great guy. Lived out in Oregon on this, historic Terry family. And he just delivered it to us. We didn't ask, is the certification valid? Because why would they sell us something that wasn't? But they weren't aware of it either, right? So then we get basically called into court. They try to serve a subpoena on us. We hide from them. We sent our kids away, literally. Their teacher kept our kids for a couple of weeks. Well, we hid in our house so we wouldn't be served a subpoena and have to be tried in the DEC's own court for using a substance that was perfectly fine to use. That's just the secretary hadn't sent in her $50 and they were out to get us. It's quite a tale, but, we fought against it. It ended up in Suffolk County Court, and Peter Cohallen he'd been the county supervisor, now he was a judge, and he got the case, and he's like, are you kidding me? He tossed it right out. But if we hadn't evaded the subpoena, and we had, by the way, the DEC sitting at the end of our driveway for a month, if they had heard the case in their own court, they would have made us sign a consent order, pay it was like $1,000 of fine a day, and then any other violation that they could find that we had, it would be a criminal case, personally criminal case. So, this is ongoing because I know other farmers, smaller farmers, that were put out of business just because they had the DEC come lurking around and finding something like this and saying, well, now you owe us thousands of dollars and you're a criminal. And again, I'm an environmentalist. I believe in regulation, but the way it worked was not all right.
Yeah, it wasn't done really for the benefit of the environment. It was all for how to just cause these extra penalties and fines. Right. Now, how was the soil conditions starting out here, and were you thinking that they would be successful for creating good quality wine on Long Island now that you see today, and what it's all the vineyards that have come about since then? But with you initially starting out there.
Well, this was the result of we did a huge amount of research. I mean, we literally lived in a Jeep Wagoneer, explored California, went up the West Coast, and there really wasn't a lot of good information about growing grapes or making wine at the time. There really wasn't. I mean, it was kind of shocking, but part of it was traveling around, and then when we decided to come to the East Coast, and we went, up to the Finger Lakes and to Lake Erie and out to Martha's Vineyard, and the more we met people doing these things, we learned about what conditions really don't work, including the idea of this guy who's growing grapes on the Hudson, and he's like, you have to be in a farming community, because if he had a tractor breakdown, he couldn't get it fixed. Mm-hmm. If he needed to buy fertilizer, he had to drive for an hour, and that was really important. So coming here and seeing this as a very strong farming community, I mean, but in terms of the soil specifically, yes, absolutely, this was part of our research that we knew. And I think for anyone who's listening to this now, to know and understand that the east end of Long Island, North Fork and South Fork, somewhat different, but essentially the best farmland you could have in the world in terms of it's flat, it's friable, it's crumbly, roots can go far, it's rain-fed agriculture. You might need to irrigate a little bit, but you're not in a desert like a lot of grapes are grown in, an irrigated desert. This is much better than that. Ambient humidity is good. The long growing season is good. So these are all things that we learned along the way. And our first decision was, if we were going to grow grapes, we were interested in making wine. Mm. And we were interested in making Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir, two very tricky grapes for different reasons. If we couldn't find a place where we could grow those grapes, we wouldn't do it. So I think our research was very focused, even though it was hard to get information. But we listened and we learned. And also the fact that, okay, you want to come here, you're going to buy farmland. It was $3,500 an acre. Go to Sagaponack, it's $5,000 an acre. Now, that would have been a bargain. Yeah. But I had a babysitting job when I was 16 in East Hampton, and it was foggy every single day. I didn't think that was a good place to grow grapes. Still not as good as the North Fork, although as a real estate investment, yeah, that would have been a good thing.
Yes.
And then to buy an acre of farmland upstate was more like $500, so much more expensive to buy the land here. However, every piece of soil is farmable. You don't have rocks. You don't have, giant hillsides that you have to somehow contain. You have a climate where you can actually grow the grapes that you want to grow. Mm-hmm. You're in a metropolitan area. You're in a market. You can have visitors come easily. So it wasn't just, and I think this was part of, our research and understanding that it's just not a matter of buying a vineyard someplace where somebody else is growing grapes and then just trying to do it. To be open to thinking, well, if we can find a place where we can achieve our goal, even if it hasn't been done before, let's do that and go with it. And also, we're young, and if we fail, we still will have the property, and maybe we just sell it and go on and do something else. Mm-hmm. I think that really helped, because you don't see that too much anymore. But I'm very, very dedicated to the idea of preserving farmland on the east end of Long Island, and I see now that even though we still have farmland preservation and we have this tax, which is absolutely wonderful, it's being eroded. People want to use the money for sewers. People want to take some of it for affordable housing. We absolutely need affordable housing. But there are people who say, well, why are we protecting this farmland? Those lands don't bring us as much tax revenue. It's a lot of land. They don't pay as many taxes as the houses. So they're taking advantage of us, and we should just, what do we care? We don't even, somebody doesn't even like wine. What do they care? But the Farmland Preservation Act was passed for the whole of Suffolk County really because a farm costs the municipality almost nothing. Doesn't send anybody to school, doesn't need road work, doesn't really need police. It's just a farm. And I think that Klein, who was the supervisor of Suffolk County at the time they passed this law, had a calculation that for every house that was built, $100 in tax money would cost the municipality $125 in services. In other words, the taxes paid didn't quite keep up with the need of the community. But the farm, $100 of tax money, even if it was less, was going to cost the municipality, $30. So the calculation is still valid. And the thing is that the quality of the farmland is so extraordinary. And I know that a lot of this farmland preservation money, people want to divert it to a view space, or, it's just something that looks nice. And I'm not against that, but I think people don't understand. And it's harder and harder to farm because it's so expensive.
Yes.
But again, like I was at a restaurant last night that features local, sustainable everything. It's a great restaurant. What is on their wine list? 2 local wines. The rest of them are from Italy, France, Spain, California. What is going on here? This is a wine region.
This is a
wine region. You can't call yourself a local, sustainable restaurant and have a wine list that's got just a token and happen to be wines that belong to their customers. So, I'm a little bit,
Yes. And that's interesting because I wanted to talk a little bit more about that in terms of the future of the area and farming. But then just to go back a bit in terms of now that you had the vineyards and it was operating for a few years, did you notice with some of the other farm areas that were even potatoes and some of the decline with that product and some of the other products, what were you thinking at the time when you started to notice other areas being sold or other people coming in saying, well, why don't we start another vineyard over here?
Oh, we were thrilled.
You were
it's funny because we were thrilled, and some of the earlier people would come to talk to us, but it was so odd because they almost acted like, well, we were going to be their competition, so whatever advice we gave them, they should do the opposite. No, we gave them advice because we wanted them to succeed. We wanted a region. Like the biggest example of that was the guy who started the Bridgehampton winery. He's actually a great guy, and he's still around, but he was what he would call himself, but he was a jingle writer. He was the first person I ever met who used a swear word in every single sentence. But this was very New York,
Yeah.
But he's out here and he's gung-ho, and he did it in Bridgehampton. Why? Because he saw that at his marketplace. He's a marketer. But he came to us and he showed us this land that he's going to buy, and we're like, but this is not a good place for a vineyard. You have water at 3 feet. You have water at 3 feet, because we were looking at the soils maps. He's like, I don't care, I'm buying it, I'm going to plant the grapes there. Well, he had a good wine, he made a little wine and everything because he bought some grapes from other places, but those vines all died. He could have bought something else. But that's the thing, but yeah, we were thrilled and then we started we got together and we started the Long Island Wine Council. which was really an important thing because we needed to bond together, even though it's still the big issue out here is, are you running a premium grape growing and winemaking business, or are you running a tourist business?
Like people like to say agrotourism.
Well, the problem comes when, just to pay for what you're doing, you really need to sell it retail, because when you sell it wholesale, you lose a third of your dollars.
Yes.
You know, and you can't sell directly to a store because it's against the law in the state of New York. You could sell directly in Washington, D.C. in a few places, but not here. So if you need the full dollar back from your, and you know, everything is so expensive, you know, labor, and like we were our own labor for a lot of it. But it's just so expensive. So you need to bring retail in, and initially we never charged for tastings because we wanted people to come and experience what we had and understand that we made wines on a par with the best wines in the world, and just welcome them. But at a certain point, you had people who were coming just 4 o'clock, where can I get some free alcohol? And at that point, we never charged, but you know, we did call it the 4 o'clock cocktail hour when they started to pile in.
Yes.
But now everybody charges for tastings, and you know, and it's nice to be able to come to a winery and sit and have a glass of wine and listen to music. But on the other hand, you know, are people coming because they respect and honor your wine and want to buy it, or are they just looking for a place to hang out? So you have to characterize yourself based on what you want everybody to come, and you want everybody to enjoy what you're doing, and you want people to understand what you're doing, but it's what we call the belly up to the bar trade. We never wanted that. And it's easy enough to cultivate that, and it's hard when you're trying to, you know, characterize yourself as a region, for people to understand that this region can grow grapes on a par with the best grapes in the world. And people will buy a bottle of California wine that they can barely drink because it's got 16% alcohol, and of course they're going to pay $40 for it. Well, that's the price. You tell them they're going to pay $40 for a bottle of Long Island wine, they're like, what? Why would I do that? And yet they're going to have so much better drinking experience with it. They just don't quite understand.
It's a little bit of the, and I think it was probably, I mean, it's probably still going on today, but just a little bit of that prejudice in terms of they'll think of California or Oregon or Washington, and just thinking of Long Island, it's like, really, what is?
I know. Well, I call it the Joey Buttafuoco syndrome. You know, what are we famous for? Joey Buttafuoco. How can we have premium wine? I don't know. Or you know, whatever, all these murders. You know, it's terrible. Yeah. But because people don't, I mean, the Nork Fork is pretty much discovered during the pandemic. But before that, you had a lot of people who went to the Hamptons. They didn't have a single clue that there even was a Nork Fork. They'd be like, the what? Where's that?
Yeah, when I talk to people, sometimes they only know Montauk, and they're like, what is that over there? I was like, well, it's on the Nork Fork side. But now talking about the land and farmland out here and land preservation, at the time when you purchased the land, you were just thinking, okay, we want to try to make a good quality wine, Merlot, but then thinking now what the idea of the land preservation part, because I've interviewed a lot of people, and a lot of them, I think, were hesitant at the time that grew up here. They're like, we were like, what are they doing out here with this? But they all have said, I really got to say that the vineyards and the growth of the Nork Fork wineries has really preserved the land and has kept the character as best as it can of the region. But at the time when you were starting out, that wasn't anything that you were really thinking
Well, we did. One of the reasons we did come here was that it hadn't passed yet, the farmland preservation law, but they were talking about it. And we thought, this is a place, first of all, we wanted to come here for the climate, for the soil, for the market opportunity and all that, but because we felt we could grow the crops that we were interested in growing. But the fact that you had this farmland preservation program and that maybe we could buy our farmland and sell the development rights, because we didn't want to develop it with houses, and get that money back. And in fact, we did do that, and it did keep us in business. So that plan was something on our radar. It was important to us. And we also helped to create and get other farmers to join the agricultural districts. So, I mean, we got involved in Farm Bureau. Actually, Alec got very involved in Farm Bureau when we were fighting the nuclear power plants. They were going to build 3 nuclear power plants on Sound Avenue, right next to Harb's.
Wow.
The farm that is now Harb's, we put a bid on that farm when we first came out, and we bid the full asking price. And the guy who owned it, he had an insurance business in Cutchogue. And he's like, no, I think the price is actually $4,000 an acre instead of, he was asking 30. But we're offering your asking price. It's like, no. So that was kind of ironic, because then we got a call from him a couple of years later saying, hey, you want to buy my farm? Because the Long Island Lighting Company land was directly adjacent to it. And they were going to build 3 nuclear power plants there. So he suddenly had land that had no value at all, being next to 3 nuclear power plants. But lucky for him and everybody else, we fought those and got them.
Yes.
Got rid of them, and now it's that beautiful preserved New York State preserved land.
Yes.
But I will say, too, that the town of Southold has not, up until change in administration recently, been friendly to the wineries. And this concept that it's not a farm if it doesn't have 30 acres. I mean, what I would like to see, and it's not a given that these vineyards are going to be able to survive. I think you do see changes in agriculture, but if people think that to have a farm legitimately, you have to have 2 acres for your house, you have to have 2 acres for your winery building, and then you have to have at least 10 acres of a crop. But what about a smaller, first of all, you want to buy an existing farm, looks like a New England farm, nice Long Island farm, and it's got a farmhouse, and it's got a barn, and you could turn that into your little winery, like you're in Burgundy, and maybe you're not open, maybe you're open only by appointment or only a limited way, or you market online. But you're taking an existing farm, and maybe you're growing some flowers, you're making some wine, you're growing some specialty crops, and you're going to have and maintain a farm business on this special place. But the town, and I've been involved on committees and conversation with zoning where we basically got shut down because I wanted, and other people on this committee wanted to allow for some flexibility in farming. That's what we need. And, you can't just imagine, because we don't do commodity farming here. We can't support commodity farming here. It's not like you're growing potatoes where you sell them for $3 a hundredweight. That's what it was. That's not what it will ever be again. But we can grow very special crops with our long growing season, full sun and all this. And if you need to allow, you have some little event with a chef or something, but it's by appointment, it's not just a tourist scene. Let's go back to a Burgundy model, or a small scale model. Let's go back to an older model and not require people to put the investment in a massive winery building, a massive reception center, because then you're asking people to have weddings there. How else are they going to fund this kind of thing? If you don't want people to be having weddings and big mass whatever drinking events, then let it go small.
What were kind of some of the examples when you were trying to get some of these, the zoning changes done?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the supervisor, he wanted to mandate that you had to have at least 10 acres of a specific crop, and you had to have certain size building. And I said to him, but this is making it necessary for the people who do it to do exactly what you don't want. You don't want a catering hall on every winery. Okay, I don't either. But then don't make it so that you have to have this massive investment. And I mean, they kicked Surrey Lane around the block so many times when they had the most beautiful design, and every time they come to the whatever board they had to come to, layers of boards. It was like, oh no, you need this. Oh no, you need that. And you had people doing a wonderful job with a beautiful vineyard and a wonderful concept, and they, squish you like a bug.
Because it didn't fit into
Because it didn't fit into some formula of... It was just so bizarre. It's like, we want you to be big, but we don't want you to succeed, basically. We don't want you to invite the public in, but we want you to build a building that's going to... you have to do that.
Host a big thing, but...
Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me. But I mean, I think we have a change in administration, and of somebody who's actually lived farming. So we'll see what happens. But the problem is people don't understand farming. They don't understand what it takes.
I think a lot of people are pro farming because I think more so they're like, well, we want to see the land.
Yeah, they like to see a pretty farm, and they like to eat raspberries.
Yes.
Okay.
But there's other
yeah
things behind that you have to understand in terms of making it work.
Right.
Because I mean even when I interviewed Al Krupski, I talked in terms of asking him how do we preserve the farmland. He's like, well, I think he said it all comes down to economics, and
yeah, he knows that it does.
Yes.
Now, I will say this, and people just assume this with grapes, but it's possible, and it's very true out in California, that there will be, and even in Bordeaux now, I mean, there's big Chinese investors who bought Bordeaux Chateau. Why? Because they've got a ton of money, and they want to do something different. So you do have people of extreme wealth who might contemplate and have come and bought a vineyard and winery, and maybe they aren't even personally involved in it, but it's something that they want to do because they love wine, or they want their children to be involved in this kind of a thing. And they don't well, actually the biggest owner of land here right now is one single person who's doing a lot of farming activities. People like that don't need to make a living off of it. Is this good? Is this bad? Hard to say, because they can characterize the region. I think one thing that Alec and I did from the start, which I'm very proud of, and I think it was really a good thing, was our concept was a farm winery. You grow your grapes that you're going to use in your winery. Your winery is adjacent. Now, people are buying and selling from each other the fruit, and I think that's a nice thing. But just this concept of the integrity of a farm that's growing, mostly, what it sells. And then it was funny because we sold a lot of grapes upstate. These wineries upstate, they can't grow what we can grow, and the trade, if you're trading, like we would get some Riesling and trade for, some Cabernet, and we got a lot more Riesling than they got Cabernet. I know the exchange rate was pretty much in our favor there.
Yes.
Because they just couldn't grow what we were growing.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. I think the Peconic Land Trust has been just spectacular along these lines. They understand what it is to start farming, to learn farming, to have a farm community behind you, and also the idea of having a relatively small farm. Browder's birds. You want to. I don't know. I mean, I love Eight Hands. I go to Eight Hands every week, and everything they do is so wonderful. That's a small farm that's doing diverse crops. What if they wanted to have a few acres of vines and make a little wine? What would be so wrong with that? But, right now, I don't know how or where they would
you wouldn't be able to do that with the current...
I mean, maybe they could. I don't know exactly what their situation is, but I just think every generation or so, things change. Mm-hmm. And we have to be open to new ways of doing things that suit our community. And, it's hard when everything's so expensive that it's only very, very wealthy people can come in, and then they're the ones who create the new character of the area. Mm-hmm. So let's have the average person stop, going into a restaurant and buying a, Italian Pinot Bianco, Pinot Grigio. Buy a local wine, or at least say to the restaurateur, "Hey, where's your Long Island wine list?"
Yes. And I think, I don't know if it's true if you go to, even in other regions, whether on the West Coast or if you go in Europe, in those regions, the restaurants, I think, usually carry
local wine.
Yeah.
Now, if it's a super high-end, place in the city of Bordeaux, they might have an international list, but certainly they're going to feature their local wine.
Yes.
And or in Italy or Spain or wherever, they're going to sell their local wine. Why wouldn't they? Mm-hmm. But
while you operated your farm, did you get some interest from restaurants or people in New York City looking to carry it there?
Yeah, what was really interesting from the very beginning, it was Daniel Ballud, Jean-Georges Van Gerichten, Jacques Pepin. It was the people at the top of the restaurant world who were fascinated by what we were doing, who came and tasted the wines and loved them. And they didn't care about their, customers blowing them off. Danny Meyer, he featured our wine. Tom Colicchio, Gramercy Tavern featured our wine. Featured it. It was on the list. They sold a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And they didn't make any excuses or anything for it. They were proud of it. So, yes, I think the people who had, were at the top of their game, who understood what we were doing and welcomed it and bought it and sold a lot of it. Mm-hmm. But, I understand if you have a local restaurant and your customers come in and they say, I want a California Cabernet. Okay. That's what they're used to. But how about
open up broad
put the stuff on the wine by the glass and maybe don't charge such a high... Actually, I think the North Fork Table and Inn does some of this, that their markup on local wines isn't necessarily... The usual formula is 300% of what they pay wholesale plus $1 or something. Mm-hmm. Or if you're buying a wine by the glass, in buying that wine by the glass, you pay for the whole bottle. So that's how the pricing goes. Mm. But if they want people to get involved in local wine, they could change the formula a little bit, and they'll sell more of it. Mm.
And then also, if you could touch on it a little bit, this kind of what you were thinking in terms of, you discussed it in your book, but when you decided that you were going to sell your land and just kind of that process, you were saying that it was a challenge at that time and we're kind of getting exhausted a bit.
Oh, you mean when we got out of the business? When we sold our development rights?
Is it Borghese?
Oh, to Borghese, yeah, when we sold the farm.
When you sold the farm, just kind of that, going through that period.
Well, we were getting divorced.
Yes.
You're getting divorced, you're selling your business, you have to run your business. Mm-hmm. You don't want anybody to know what's going on, because that would put it into question. But, it was a personal thing. And we had to just keep it going. And it was a bizarre thing, for me, because in our usual way, we were married for 31 years, but even though we're going through a divorce, we're still living in the same place, but not exactly on friendly terms. We go down to the winery and we're acting like we always have for 31 years, because we cared. We probably ran the winery as well then as we ever had. We always cared. And we were always on the same page. Like Alec and I worked so well together because, I met him when I was barely 18. He was 19 and a half, so he was the old man. But we were together in all our learning about wine and learning to cook and tasting. Our tasting experience was all together, so we had that same shared vocabulary, and our goals were the same. I mean, we really, both of us cared desperately, and we were willing, and we did put everything on the line for it. Yeah. But it was, it's horrible. You're getting divorced, you're selling your business, you don't know where you're going next. Very tough.
Yeah. And then looking back, seeing how the area has evolved even from when you sold the farm, looking at yourself as the pioneer for the region, for creating a wine region in the U.S., and looking at it today, what kind of thoughts go through your mind?
Well, I was brought up not to brag, not to take credit for anything. And of course, my daughter always says to me, well, all this traffic is your fault. So if you want to take credit for anything. But, thinking about it, I think that what Alec and I did was extraordinary. It was revolutionary. And we did it by putting everything we had into it and really learning and listening and participating and accepting help when we needed it, making a community, bonding with the community that was already here, being incredibly grateful for all of that. So I think it was an extraordinary thing that we did. I loved farming. I loved my farm. I loved the North Fork. I cannot believe I still live here. I wake up and just the sun, even today, it's just a gorgeous day, and it's always a gorgeous day here. That the sky, the horizon to horizon sky that we have, I always put the moonrise on my calendar and go out, try to go down to the water and watch the moonrise, or go look over a farm field. It's such a precious thing. So I think that, to be called a pioneer was true. I think, we did it, and not that we didn't have help, not that we didn't have a certain privilege in having the money to start, but hey, we didn't have nearly enough money. And we did the work ourselves. Literally, I worked with my baby on my back and did everything. And I always, when we had employees, we never had as many as would have been great to have, but at the same time, worked alongside the people who worked, and I would never ask anybody to do a job that I would not do myself. And we were creative. We started the first wine futures program because we needed to be able to buy very expensive French oak barrels, and we didn't have the money for it, so we thought, let's sell futures like they do in Bordeaux. And people would buy the wine at a discount in the fall and come a year later and pick up the wine, and we would take the money from that sale and buy barrels so that we could make the best wine. We got great press too. The Newsday, the New York Times, the Daily News, a lot of magazines, they were, they're looking for a story, but they would come and write about us, and that was a huge help. But you can't just pioneer in a vacuum. You have to take the first step and then have other people follow. And I think there are people who are trying to rewrite the narrative today a little bit, that we were just privileged hippies or whatever. But I honestly, thinking it through, have to give props to all the work that we did in researching, looking endlessly for the right spot. And, could you have done it differently one way or another? Well, you could always do something differently. You have regrets, of course, you have this and that regret, but all in all, I think we made really good choices, and just the fact that we spent so much time looking into it and then being very devoted to keeping it premium wine. Because at one point people were saying, oh, well, it's a good place to grow grapes, so let's just grow whatever grapes, hybrids and that, and we'll just, we'll make cheap wine and bulk wine. And we were like, no, we can do the very best. Why don't we do the very best? Let's stick with that idea and not cheapen it. And that's the only way. And honestly, that's how the Napa Valley succeeded, because Bob Mondavi, he was like, we are never going to just have this be, his family had a bulk wine business. C.K. Mondavi was bulk wine. He knew what that was like. And he's like, no, I want to do premium wine. I want to invite, Hollywood figures in and get them drinking it, and not have this be a playland for children, and, stick to the narrative and make it be the best. And that worked for them. It really worked for them. And, that was what we tried to do, and basically at the same time, because that was all in the early 70s. So.
Do you feel like that's still something that's being pushed today in terms of the quality of wine, and then even in terms of now because I'm ignorant in terms of the history and how to talk about wines, but the vines have been here, a lot of them have been here, even say it was like 20 years or more now. Would this region be considered more of it's an established more region now because of the vines?
I mean, everybody wants to say it's new. It's an established region. It just happens to be tiny. It's the size of Chablis. It's a tiny, tiny little region. And I think that's one reason why it's harder. We can't grow too much outside the boundaries, but look at what we can do. If you're willing to pay, $6.99 a pound for an heirloom tomato, why wouldn't you pay $20 for a bottle of one of the best Chardonnays you've ever tasted? Or even $25. I mean, so I mean, okay, the world changes. Now people are buying wine in cans, which I think is a great idea. I don't think you need a cork finish. People are using wine more casually, and even we have sort of the rise of the fancy cocktails, these mixed drinks. They have the mixologist, and you have all these beers. So what used to be a big book of wines when you go to a restaurant, now it's a sheet of paper, and a third of it is wine, and then there's beer, and then there's cocktails. So that puts the squeeze on it, absolutely. It's just, people are more casual. They're using it differently. So it's a little hard to say how it can be maintained. I think to maintain the standard of quality, yes, it's really, really important. I see the Hearn family. They just bought Lieb Cellars, but Russell Hearn has been a partner there. He was the genius behind Premium Cellars. He and his wife and now daughter and her husband, what they do, they are now buying, I guess, some hybrid grapes. I mean, they're making wine from some of the older upstate grapes because, I mean, you'd have to ask them, but I think it's cheaper. The fruit is cheaper. They can make an interesting wine. So they're doing something that we absolutely did not want to do when we first came here, because we wanted to grow the best premium Vitis vinifera, Cabernet, Chardonnay, so on, and prove we could do it here and limit our production to that, because that was the spotlight. That's what the world accepted as the best wine. Now things are more casual. We haven't established wine region. You're trying to keep a business going, and it's absolutely fine to be experimenting and doing different things. I mean, okay, plant Lagrein, fine, you can market it, but don't tell me Lagrein is Merlot. But maybe you love it. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, this is all personal thing, but as Al Krupski said, it's a business.
Yeah.
So you have to find a way to make it work. The thing is with, so many of these people, Robin Epperson McCarthy, she's a fabulous winemaker. She's one of the best winemakers maybe in the world. She just took over Osprey Dominion as a winemaker. She has her own brand, and I think her wines are extraordinary. She's come into a family winery that was maybe a little more on the tourist-oriented side. I mean, I can't speak for her, but I think she is clearly a premium winemaker. She's going to make a difference there. I don't know what she's going to do, but just by her vision, by her focus, by her ability. And, I'm not saying things are going to turn around, but we still have so many people that are really dedicated fine winemakers who understand what can be done. And I think because of the wine clubs are wonderful, where each winery has its following and it has its devoted. Now, I should mention my son Xander Hargrave is the winemaker at Pellegrini Vineyard, absolutely devoted to the top quality, and they have a wine club that supports them. Mm-hmm. And they do events, but from his point of view, he's not going to put out a wine that isn't the best thing that he can make. Mm-hmm. So I think that's still the tenor here.
Yes. And in terms of what advice you might give to people today, that even aspiring winemakers that might want to start their own vineyard?
Really to take every opportunity to do any aspect of the business. And that, means being in the field, being in the winery, being in the marketplace as much as you ever possibly can. Mm-hmm. Because you need to be in it to understand it. And the other thing is, it's a people business. And like anything else, you have people that get along with, these people think one way, these people think another way. You're going to find your friends. One of the best things that happened, it was just so wonderful. You had John Ross come here, and he started a Thursday night winemakers once a month. Did he talk about this? But I think
so, yeah.
Yeah. So he organized this with Eric Fry, who was a longtime winemaker at the Lens Winery. Anyone who is a winemaker, actual winemaker, making wine, not just a winery owner, in some cases they were the same thing, could come and bring a wine in a paper bag, mystery wine, and so there'd probably be like maybe 10 of us at a time. It was a nice sized group. Mm-hmm. But we would come, we would bring the wines all hidden so nobody knew what they were to John. He would go in the kitchen, he would look at them, he would create an incredible meal, like multi-course meal, using those wines, and then we would taste the wines with his food, and we would discuss the wines without knowing what they were, and then they would be revealed, and whoever brought the wine that scored the highest, because we'd score them, would get his or her meal. I was the only woman there, but get their meal paid for. So, yes. Because at first people would bring crappy wine, just to, so we're like, no. And they could not be Long Island wines. So this created, it was like the old community that I grew up with, where people got to know each other. And then a bunch of the winemakers, they still do this. They will go help each other. Somebody's got a question about a wine, they'll call up. And I know Xander does this with the winemaker at Lens. Well, they'll help each other, and they'll say, hey, you want to come taste my wine? So not even if it's a problem, but just let's talk about what we're doing. Or somebody's buying barrels, let's put together an order. It's a people business. Wine is convivial. You get together to enjoy it. It's not something you're necessarily going to sit and drink, all by yourself. You might, but much better with your friends.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so... And similarly, you make friends with the restaurateurs, with the distributors, with whoever. The whole distribution system is ridiculous and terrible and really, really hard to maneuver. And a lot of the Long Island wineries really don't want to go through the distributors, so they sell themselves to a small market. Or, like the way Roanoke does it. They sell their wine to their wine club. They do a spectacular job. They make wonderful wines. You want to get Roanoke wine? You got to be a member of the wine club. And I guess maybe they have an outlet too on Love Lane, but it's very closely cared for marketing that has enthusiastic people who really want these and understand these wines. It's not really like put an ad in the New York Times and hope people come and buy what you're selling. It's much too small. The scale is much too small for that kind of thing.
Yes.
We didn't advertise because we said that our sales idea was the exponential dinner party. Somebody serves our wine at a dinner party. Everybody likes the wine. They go out and buy it. They serve it to their friends, and it grows. Mm-hmm. But we couldn't afford advertising, and it didn't work if we ever tried it.
Mm-hmm. And also just general question about wines and what might be some of your favorites in terms of any particular wines or vintages that hold a special meaning for you.
I mean, there was an 88 Cabernet Sauvignon. I think it was 88. You have an idea in your mind as a winemaker of what you want to do. And for me, it was kind of based on my experience with Bordeaux wines for the Cabernets. I knew what I liked and I knew what a great wine was. It has to be very nuanced and it has to be very intriguing and not just one kind of set thing. And we'd been making wine for a few years, and it never quite achieved what I really was hoping for. And it went down, and I think it was 88, but it might have been 93. One a really special vintage, but the wine wasn't special necessarily when we picked it. And then I remember in January, you go in the cellar and taste the wines, and we call that the dumb period or the adolescence of the wine. They just don't. I don't know, they don't do anything. But we went and tasted from this barrel, and I think it was probably in February or March, and I just tasted what I had hoped to find. And I just cried. Because, I mean, we could do it. We could actually do it. And I don't think I cried every time, but I've certainly had that experience more than once, and it wasn't necessarily with a single wine. I mean, so much of it with wine is the whole setting, what is the meal and who are you with and how does the wine evolve? Because I think it's very characteristic of Long Island wine, unlike, let's say, a hot climate type of California wine, where you taste the wine and you're not getting a big, because the alcohol is lower than the California wine, so you're not getting like a boom sound the trumpet. It's more, chamber music. You're just getting, oh, well, that's nice and it smells alluring. But then as you drink it and you kind of get into it, it blossoms and it grows in impact, and then the aftertaste is wonderful, and you don't have a headache later,
Yes.
So I think, that's experientially what I look for and hope for and have found. And of course, sometimes you make a wine that you're not that happy with, but fact of the matter is you still have to sell it, so you just smile.
Yes.
But there's a lot of great wine out here, a lot of great wine. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just have two other questions. I know we've talked about the North Fork and some of the things you've enjoyed, but with living and working out here, since you moved out here and up until now, what have you enjoyed the most about your time out here?
Oh man, I mean, I love the North Fork. I actually am a swimmer. I love to swim. And this year, for the first time, I've swum in the bay or the Sound every month, except I didn't do it in December or January. But it's not even for the cold plunge, but it's just getting out under that open sky. But I love to go for walks, and I feel like we have created a food and wine destination, and I think the food and the wine go together. And so, being part of that is very, very exciting and rewarding to me. Mm-hmm. And the friends that I've made here, because it's just a wonderful place to be. Yes. You could say it's a little low-key. I mean, I'm not low-key. I'm pretty ramped up all the time. So my kids are always saying to me, they say, simmer down, Hargrave, simmer down. It works for about half a minute. I'm still revved up.
Yes.
Because I'm very excited about it, and I love it, and, oh man, I mean, I got rhubarb from Wickham's and asparagus. Last week, this week, I can't get enough of it. I'm eating rhubarb all the time, and then for Mother's Day, my kids, they made a wonderful meal, and I just love raw seafood, and the seafood there is like, you can't believe how fresh it is because it's a wholesaler. It comes in so fresh, and Barbara works there. She's just a champ, and so she helps us out when we're, what's the freshest thing. But my son got fresh lobster, and made lobster rolls for Mother's Day, and my daughter made a rhubarb crisp with the Wickhams. I mean, you can't beat that.
No.
It's spring, like, you celebrate. It's just the best thing in the world. And it goes on, and it gets better and better. You go to Sang Lee. I got bok choy. I got bok choy from Sang Lee. Last night I made pasta, just tossed it with the bok choy, and then chili crisp. I don't know if you're into chili crisp. I never thought I'd like this. Very spicy.
I don't think I've tried
This is a new kind of pasta. Chili crisp on the noodles,
Oh, wow.
Oh my God, it was so good. Instead of Parmesan,
Yes.
Let's go Asian. So it was
Wonderful.
Great. A little bit of Pellegrini Chardonnay. You're in heaven. Absolutely heaven.
Yes. And then also, in terms of the future of, it could be even just the North Fork and its community, but if you wanted to also think about the wineries, but what do you hope for the future of the area and its community?
I mean, what I hope for, it's just that, hope. Because I see a lot of changes that are hard to, and of course we have climate change. I mean, you go down to the water, and it's high tide, and that water is high. But I really, having farmed here for so long and been part of the farm community, I hope that we can maintain it. It's part of our really regional security, if you want to think about it that way. I don't care if you're growing grapes, raspberries, corn, rutabagas, flowers. Keep that farmland going, because it's a precious resource that is so unique, and people don't understand it enough. But we really have to keep it going. And I mean, people need a place to live. But there's limited water too. I mean, if you consider that the Water Authority is building a whole pipeline to bring water out here from the Pine Barrens, that's our recharge basin. But what is this water for? Because it's a lot more water than we've ever needed. It's not necessarily because people are drinking more water. It's for irrigation, not for irrigation of crops. For people's bushes.
And lawns.
For people's lawns. Come on, guys. Let's grapple with this. This is a real issue.
That's where you think you need more regulation on something like that, where it's not a necessity.
Don't make it just so, okay, it's a little more expensive to buy a little more water when you have somebody who's a multi-billionaire, could not care less what it costs. And we, as the people who are paying for this massive infrastructure to come out here, plundering water from the Pine Barrens, bring it out here so that we can irrigate somebody's fancy mansion. I don't know. What do you think? We got to think that through.
Doesn't seem
that's not
like
my biggest issue, but I can get excited about all kinds of things, so that's one.
Yeah.
And also, there have been many good sites proposed for affordable housing. Paul Pulaski's had several great places. And then when you get a few people who are like, oh, but I thought there was an owl there that's protected. I know there's an owl that's protected, and I want the owl to be protected, but that owl is going to be so happy sitting in a tree next to all those nice apartments. It's got to happen somewhere where you already have some population and support, and don't just be thinking you're going to go put the grid back. When we were here, the farmland that we had, the town had already made a proposed grid for houses over pretty much every farm. It was on some piece of paper somewhere. It was just the assumption.
It would have looked like the rest of Western.
It would
Long
look
Island.
like Levittown, and that was just the assumption. So I think that to have made this be such a beautiful place, and agricultural, keeping that going, yeah, it's really crucial. It's really key, and it makes life wonderful for those of us who are here. And I'm not going to say pull up the ladder, I'm aboard, because I don't think that way. But I also think you have to limit your development based on the real resources that you have and protect what you have, and then make it equitable, help people who need help. I mean, CAST is an incredible organization out here. What they've done is spectacular, and some of the farmers, Trimble's, Wickham's, Sanglee, lots of farmers, they're not just bringing stuff that nobody has bought. They're bringing food to help feed people here.
No, and that it would be a real shame to see those. We need to be able to support the local farming too, and you worry about some of those areas. Well, I think personally, with my own ideas about in terms of housing, I think it should be more within the hamlet area and shouldn't be a sprawl.
Yeah, if it can be.
Like, as you've probably seen in other areas throughout, even in Europe.
Yeah.
Where they've condensed it a little bit, but you don't have to have it where it's a mid-rise. You can keep it 2 stories, and it's tough.
Well, you have the issue of the septic systems. I mean, that's a large part of it.
Yeah.
But in there, and you have, West Hampton, they've got their sewer, and other Southampton Village thinking about a sewer. Greenport has a sewer. But then you have a proposal for a really good plan, and you get a few people, or the recreation center with a pool, and I don't know, just a few people seem to be able to bring down a very good project that would benefit the whole community. So I've been here a long time, and I've just seen it over and over again. So I'm realistic. I know things change. You can't hold things just the same way, but I am very, very proud of what we've done, and I think the quality of the Long Island wines is spectacular. And we do have a wine and food nexus here that we are happy to welcome visitors to enjoy if they behave.
Yes.
I mean, come on, guys, be polite.
Yeah.
Don't drive your car like you want to knock off the next bicyclist.
Yes. No, and then I usually just ask if there's anything else you wanted to say or discuss that we haven't talked about.
How long have we been talking? I think I've had a lot to say. Thank you very much.
Okay.
No, this has been really great. Thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I think it's wonderful to have this podcast. And I know I do get on my I'm going back to my missionary roots maybe a little bit, but I also feel that there's joy to be had here, and I go back to being a community and helping each other, because I think that that's something we still have here, very much a spirit of collaboration and on the North Fork, and I think we need to keep that.
Yes, it's
a beautiful place.
Absolutely. No, that's something that people have been talking about a lot. With community has come up, and making sure we keep that as we move forward and don't lose that.
Yeah. As
things change, but
well, it's easy also for politics to divide us, but I think in a town this small, I have very strong political beliefs, but I have friends who have different political beliefs, and I know I'm not going to persuade them of my beliefs, but I can be their neighbor. I can be their, I don't have to be rude to them. I don't have to, we can also get together on some of the things that are important, set aside some of those ideas that we don't agree on, but let's get together in some other things that have to do with keeping this a beautiful place, the beautiful place that it is.
Yes. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come in and tell your story. It was really a pleasure to talk with you, and really just kind of going through everything that you've done and seeing all the accomplishments you've done for the North Fork, and just really that initial start of your time out here. And that was really important, and it was really nice to hear that story.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for reading my book and being so thoughtful in your comments.
Absolutely.
Really, this was fun.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 54 with Louisa Hargrave. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.